Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, a marketing professor and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today we have a very special guest, Jeremiah Andrick, VP of Marketing and Digital Experiences at SteelSeries. SteelSeries is a Danish producer of gaming accessories and peripherals such as headsets, keyboards, gaming surfaces, mice, and software. Jeremiah has almost 2 decades of digital marketing experience. He started his career with Microsoft in 2007 as a webmaster and tool developer, and has since worked with other big names, including Logitech, HTC Vive, and VCIS Inc. He's now at SteelSeries. He's also a passionate volunteer and mentor. Jeremiah is currently volunteering with Seattle Startup Drinks and the Boys and Girls Club of King County. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of different topics, from mentorship, building teams, lifelong learning, and so much more. How are you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So I know I give you like an official intro, but now I want to give the unofficial intro. So let's go back 10, 15 years. Danny Gavin's like this 25-year-old marketer, doesn't really go to a lot of conferences. There's this one really cool conference in Houston, Texas, put on by I think it was HIMA. And, we were lucky to get like speakers all around the country to come in, which was really awesome. And here's this really cool redhead guy, Jeremiah Andrick. He comes in, his presenting style is so different than everyone else. And he's really cool. And it's like, man, I just wish I could sit next to him during lunch so I could talk with him. And I actually got to do that and got to have like this little rapport. And, sometimes the people on the stage are like kind of untouchable, but Jeremiah was just so cool and so inspirational. And he's someone that I've watched and followed for years. So it's a big deal to have him on here today. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I remember that conference really well because I got to experiment a lot too. And people were so generous. And I think I spoke like 4 years in a row there, which was pretty cool, getting invited. Houston's so hot, even in February. And I was always just like, as long as I could stay in the conference rooms, I was fine. So I love it there, though. People were so great.
Yeah, good times. Let's start off. Where did you go to school and what did you study?
Actually, my college education was a little strange because I got out of high school and I didn't really know where I wanted to go. And originally I'd gotten accepted at Baylor and LeTourneau in Texas, both of those schools. I grew up in North Dakota. I also looked at University of North Dakota, and I had a great uncle who, at the funeral of a great aunt, was the head of the church that I grew up in. He said to me, all those places sound really nice, but it'd be really great if you went to Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri next year. And I was like, okay. I was pretty malleable. I'm like, I guess I'll go there. And in spite of not having any scholarships or anything, I dropped everything, changed my plans, and went to Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri. Sight unseen. I had seen all the other schools and I had scholarships, and I just dropped everything and went. And it's a liberal arts private college. They have about 1,600 students there. It was a pretty good experience for me overall, other than the fact that it's related to the Assemblies of God Church. And even though I grew up in that church, my parents were liberal in some unique ways, I would say. Like, they were very much like, you've got to sort out religion stuff for yourself, and encouraged us to embrace religion. But it was still like one of those things you have to sort out on your own. And to go to a religious institution, I was very much in culture shock. I did not fit in. I grew up joking like, you don't drink, you don't dance, and you don't go with girls who do, kind of thing. And I was like, at this school where people really lived that. And I was like, I drink, I dance, and I go with girls who do, kind of thing. So I didn't fit in very well. I lasted about 1.5 years there, and then transferred to Southwest Missouri State, which is now Missouri State University. And I was really only there for 1 year. I studied computer science and journalism in both schools. I had a double major. I ended up switching my major midstream to communication theory, which ultimately was much more beneficial to my computer science engineering experience. But I actually ended up dropping out my 3rd year to go work on a startup. There was a little startup in town working on building media properties for food service and for ad clients. It was, at the time, I think it was number 11 in promo, number 75 in Adweek in terms of total capitalized billings, agency called Noble & Associates. Through mergers and acquisitions now, they don't actually exist anymore. But I worked on Tyson Chicken's first website and French's Mustard's first website, and I was 17 years old, 18 years old when I kind of got interested in all of that. And so I dropped out of college at 19, 20, go work for them full time. I'm living the .com dream a little bit. And it really wasn't until I had been at Microsoft 3 years before I finished my college degree. And I kept working on it. My mom really wanted me to finish. It was a big thing for her just to have it, even though by that point I have this kind of fully developed career. I'm in a place that's going to, add all this additional educational value to me. But in studying communication theory, I think one of the things that really excited me about it is I got to understand both how people engage with different systems of media and the history of that and the psychology behind it, and really became a student of the psychology of behaviors in engaging with new technology and how we learn and how we engage them. And my degree is a Bachelor of Science. So a lot of times I have to clarify to people, like, I didn't get not that there's anything wrong with a BA in communications, but that often leads to like PR careers and things like that. Not a bad field. On the science side, I was more interested in how do people discover stuff? How do they find information? And I think you see that a lot in my talks that I used to give when I would go speaking more regularly, is like, how do these patterns play out in the way people communicate? And so that's really where I began. It was kind of a tumultuous ride for a while there. I definitely lived that 90s dream of not really knowing what I was going to do and flipping around a lot for that brief period.
And were your parents supportive during that time? Or was like, oh my gosh, what's Jeremiah doing?
I think my mom was worried, but she trusted me. I think she knew that I had a really strong work ethic. I worked at nights at a little print shop to pay for my basic needs at, covering my rent. I did, key lining and page layout and typesetting. I mean, old school typesetting. I worked at an old school print shop. We did some things digitally, but, I think I'd proved to her like I had a pretty strong work ethic. As a kid, I ran the single screen movie theater on the weekends and also worked as a CNA. So I think she already kind of knew like I was a hustler. I was going to do what it takes to pay the bills. But coming from a family, my grandfather's first generation in the US, my mom's dad, and we had kind of an immigrant mentality of you work and you put in the work. I was never not reminded that. And as long as I kind of showed that hustle, she didn't really care. But there was an expectation that education was a game changer. My sister is a college professor. My brother works in academia on the institutional side. I think there's a strong belief in our family. And even now, I still strongly believe in academics. I'm just riddled with ADHD and wasn't really good at being in a classroom. The classroom wasn't designed for people like me. Her encouragement was really more in find something you love and go and dig into it. I was really grateful that I had somebody who was that supportive of me sort of seeking out my passion and my path,
It sounds like you had a really good support system.
Yeah, particularly from my mom. My parents split up when I was probably 12 or 13. They ran restaurants in North Dakota and were very entrepreneurial themselves. But I was lucky to have somebody who wanted me to go chase my own dreams and not be held back by other people, or like how things must work, But she still wanted me to finish that degree. She wanted that paper. So
and you did it. So it all worked out.
Yeah, it did work out in the end. That's the main thing.
So Jeremiah, how would you define a mentor?
I think to me, a mentor is about investment. Throughout your career and your life, I think a lot of us have people who want to invest in us or who are willing to invest in us. And I think there's, a great mentor, somebody who really spends a lot of time investing in one or another person who sees that they have something they can pour into other people. And, a great mentor does it not for glory or for ego, but actually to sharpen their own skills, to refine their ideas. I think the world is a bit of a laboratory for all of us, and our own notions of things are really tested when we have to take them outside of our own circle of control and influence. That's us. And then we have to apply it somewhere else. And when you're helping and trying to encourage other people, then you really have to test it. And being a mentor or being a coach to other people, for some people feels like this supernatural thing. But I think the best ones, it's not natural. It's uncomfortable. It's putting yourself out there in a way that I don't want my ideas to be super tested, because what if I'm wrong? What if I guide this person the wrong way? And you really can't be afraid of that. A great mentor is the kind of person who does it for the love of the other person and the desire to see the world better. I'm generally of the view that we should leave the world, in whatever way you face it, better than when you came into a place. If a room is untidy and you leave that room, if you haven't tidied it up a little bit as you leave, you're probably not maybe the right person to be a mentor. Like, you want to see the world in a place that there's things that you can contribute back into. And so when I invest both myself and people, but in the people who've invested in me, they've been the kind of people who wanted to see the world better. And we're good at helping with that, I think, in so many ways.
So I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but you just spoke about being like at a religious college. But it's interesting in rabbinical school, both even in like high school and secondary, the learning style is, in Hebrew, it's called chavrusa, which means sort of partnership. And actually, most of the learning happens where you're sitting at a table across from someone else. And there's a lot of back and forth of teaching and learning. And part of the reason to do that is like exactly what you're saying, like through teaching someone else something, that's actually how you're going to learn it better. Just you mentioned before, which is a concept which I don't think I've heard in 75 or so episodes, but that idea of that, it doesn't mean that the mentor's doing it because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to get something out of it. But truthfully, by them, like you said, helping someone out, testing their ideas, they're actually going to grow and gain more. That just kind of,
yeah, I mean, I think the scriptures talk about iron sharpening iron. And I think most religious traditions have this idea. And I think if you look at other religions that are sort of outside of the Judeo-Christian worldview, I think there's similar ideas. I even have a young Islamic guy on my team right now, and him and I we've spent hours talking about the way the world works and from our different viewpoints, not to disagree with each other, but actually to further sharpen our own viewpoints. I think in many ways you get a stronger sense of your own view when they are challenged. And a good mentor, I mean, some of the mentors in my life have had to put up with me when I was younger, coming into the room and going like, you are wrong. And like me yelling at them. And especially when I was younger, I was not a very pleasant person always. I would just come in and be like, this is the way things need to be, and this is how we need to move, and why is it taking so long? And let's go. You get a little older and a little wiser, and you go like, oh, there's things you don't see. But you need to be able to, I think, sharpen against each other. You need to have that friction. Friction creates heat, I guess, and the heat creates a spark, hopefully, to create better ideas. And maybe it is one of those things that we miss now in this digital space where we have to meet like this rather than in person as much post-COVID, but where, we don't have that across the table from each other as much as we used to in some ways. There's a lot of value in that, and it's very special, I think, as an experience for us to be able to do that.
I have a son who's 13 and he's very black and white. So I think I need to get him to talk to you a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hung on to that teenage black and whiteness for a lot longer than I think most people did, probably. But, we learn and we grow. I'm definitely a lot wiser now at 45 than I was at, 20 or 22. I definitely had a strong sense of, I know how the world works. And now I'm like, the more I know, the more I'm like, I don't understand why the world works this way. But really it's about learning how to move through the world, and adapt to things rather than, knowledge of the world. And I'm so confident in my ability to learn, but not always confident in my ability to know, and where earlier in my life, I think I felt like I knew everything and didn't need to learn. And now I'm like, what can I do next that I need to learn? So yeah, it's very important.
Okay, let's dive into some of your mentors. So you mentioned your grandfather shortly before. Why do you consider him as one of your mentors?
My grandpa was an interesting guy. His dad had come over from Sweden at a very, very young age, at 11 years old, by himself, and had a lot of pressure. It was a long story there, but had a lot of pressure to typical immigrant family, like to better themselves, having come from Sweden, and wanted a better life for him and his family. He had dropped out of high school when he was a kid. He did join the U.S. Navy and learned a trade, and came back and built a home moving and home building business with his brothers. And they ran that business for 50 some years. I grew up in the back of that construction yard and lumber yard. And, from a little kid, I was expected to both work and help out there, whether it was moving trash around or cleaning up the shop, but just generally working with my grandfather and watching his work ethic, but more importantly, the way he ran his business. And he was an open book about a lot of things. He would ask us questions as young men, me and my cousins, about how we were handling our money and how were we paying ourselves, were we paying tithe, how were we planning things. And he was just the kind of person who loved to work hard, and he showed an incredible work ethic to us. And in many ways, it wasn't always the conversations that you have with later mentors in your life, but was this, like, you saw his routine day in and day out about the way he treated his customers. I understood very, very early on that my grandfather was a fair and deliberate man with his customers. He cared a lot that they were happy with the company's work, that, sometimes if people couldn't afford a thing they needed, he made stuff happen for them. And he wanted to do right in the world. In town, if somebody was on a hard time and needed a job, he was one of the first people to offer people work and find them work, because he personally believed that a man who puts his hand to work is going to be better than one who's sitting around doing nothing. Often he invested in people who probably didn't entirely appreciate the investment too. That's typical with that kind of thing. He wasn't naive, but he was a hard worker. And with him, I also learned the just like value of having a schedule. He was the kind of person who, him and his brothers sat every day, and they, not to turn this into religious talk, but they sat every day and did a devotional together in the morning, had their coffee, went out and did work. And then they'd go build something, and then they'd come in and do fika and sit and have coffee. And I'd go and sit with them as a kid. Fika is like that Swedish word for the 10:30 coffee break. I'd come in and they'd sit drinking their terrible coffee, and these old Scandinavian men would sit in the back of the lumberyard and not talk for 30 minutes. Just sit and stare at each other. And every once in a while, somebody might go, did you hear about such and such family or whatever? They'd gossip like little old ladies. But generally speaking, they would take these breaks, at 10 and 2, they would take these breaks and they would pace themselves through their work. And I think it made them better at their work, that they had this kind of schedule and approach and routine. And yet my grandfather would put in hours and hours of hard work. When I was in college, my freshman year, came home to help him re-roof his own garage, and he was in his 70s. And the day after I left, the man fell off the roof, got back up on the roof, and finished what he was working on. And a week later, goes to my mother, lifts up his shirt and shows these bruises, and was like, should I go to the hospital? He was that kind of man. It wasn't that he was a superhero. It was that, everybody's playing through something, and he was the kind of person who just, you have to keep moving. If you don't keep moving, you're going to fall apart, and you have to keep working. I feel like I learned a lot about my own work ethic with him, just my desire to put my hands to something and to keep moving, and to have the respect of a community the way he did. When he passed away, hearing people talk about him as a person was almost its own mentoring event. It was like all these reminding of what character means, and being an imperfect person in an imperfect world, but trying to deliver your best for your family and for yourself was something he was very good at. When one of his brothers died, he took care of his kids for a very long time, even though he had a large family himself. He had a family of 9, and he helped take care of his brother's kids. There were 6 of them, making sure that they had clothes and food and things they needed. These are values that I knew as a kid going into my adulthood that I wanted to emulate, that I wanted to invest in others and invest in my community and invest in my business, and to also invest in the people that I hire and the people that I work with. How can I help make them better? He taught me a lot. And the fact that I can do the trim in my house or do certain kinds of things around here that require physical labor, even though I don't want to, boy, I'll tell you, that's a weird mental thing you have to do. It's I know I can do this, so I should probably go fix this thing. But I also am busy, and it's probably not the best use of my time to go and redo all the trim in the house right now. That doesn't mean I haven't done stuff like that, but I am my grandfather's grandson in that way. I love spending time doing things with my hands and investing in it, and it feels good as a person to do those things. So yeah, he was a great example type mentor of things. And he cared a lot about his grandsons. He wanted us to be the best versions of ourselves. And we were often told when we were young, we have this, it was the immigrant thing in a way. It's like, your family came here and they worked hard, so you need to go work hard too. We invested a ton so you could go to your fancy schools and you could go work on computers and play with your toys, so it's definitely a different mindset for sure.
Man, he sounds like a special guy. It explains a lot about you, just knowing about you. And I mean, having someone in your life like that, it can change your whole life, right? And not having someone like that, can change your whole life.
I actually think about that a lot, like how, I know a lot of people who have not had a kind of connecting influence or like, a shining light to show as an example of stuff. And, the downside of having somebody like him in your life too is it's a high standard to live up to for some people. And I think some people will look at these kinds of behaviors and go like, well, I want to have a different path, and think that there's only one way or there's only one standard. And I think when you look at somebody like that, you should actually see that actually what their life is an example of how there is a bunch of different paths. He didn't take a traditional path, and he did work with his hand, but he was still a businessman who built a successful and long-running business. You don't have to take one path to the place, but what a lot of people will see is the hard work and think that, well, I just have to brute force everything or whatever, and that they reject it. And I don't think that's the lesson you should take away from people like my grandfather, or even the way I work today. You have to do what's best and optimal for you to get the job done and to make your life what you want out of it.
Was there ever any pressure or opportunity to join the family business?
Not really. I think nobody wanted us to have to work like they had to work. I think in later years, several of my cousins and I got together and we go hunting as a family together every fall. And my cousin Scott was in the Navy, and he works for the U.S. Military as a contractor. And him and I will often talk about, like, it's too bad somebody in the family didn't take over, whether it was one of the sons, and I know for my grandfather, it was sad when he sold and auctioned off the business as he retired, but it's also North Dakota. And even with the oil industry there, it's a tough place, and it's hard country out there. It builds hard people, and nobody really wanted us to have to go through and live the way they had to live and to hustle the way they had to hustle. They wanted us to have a better situation. And I think that's why my grandfather, when he would ask us questions about money, for example, his whole thing was like, pay yourself and pay God first, and then do what you have to do after that, were like kind of big ideals for him, not just because of his religious views, but because of his own wanting to make sure he built a better life after, he wanted. And I think he probably had regrets that he had not been able to invest more to set up his kids even better than they were set up. He's sharing this idea that you have to put money in savings. You have to have a backup plan to your backup plan. Winter's coming, and people don't. It's a good lesson, but he didn't really I don't think they really ever wanted us to be in that position. And I'm sort of glad, because as I can do stuff with my hands, but my grandpa could pour a slab of cement without even thinking about it, where I would have to go and watch YouTube videos. So, so I'm grateful that I didn't have to make that a part of my life, for sure.
So let's move over to mentors in your professional life. So someone that you've mentioned before is Lance Binley, who I believe worked with you at Logitech. Tell me why Lance is one of your influential mentors.
I think for a lot of people who knew me around the time I joined Logitech, I was not in super great shape. My 2 years of working on Bing were really hard for me personally and professionally. I traveled around the world and I just was exhausted. Microsoft was burning me out. It's a lovely place, honestly. Like, I still maintain tons of friendships at Microsoft, and it really is a great place. But I was burnt out and was really struggling. And honestly, I was pretty broken. And, I resigned from Microsoft and just said, look, I'm done. I can't travel anymore. I can't go and speak at these conferences. I can't do engineering work and do marketing. I need a different path. I was burning out pretty hard. I'd gotten like a skin condition that was on my face, largely from stress. Like, I was so stressed out working hard. And so I quit. I took a bunch of time off, and Brent Payne, who's an SEO who had worked at the Tribune Company for a while, I'd met him through SEO and doing webmaster work at Microsoft with the webmaster community. He reached out to me and said, I know this guy, Lance Binley. He's building a team at Logitech. He'd been at a bunch of other companies. He's going to call you. And I get this call from Lance and interview with them, and I meet him. And he was just one of those kinds of people where right away I was like, something about this guy I really like. And, he's an interesting character. He was a Buddhist. He'd been divorced and has a second wife. And, he's just a pretty normal person in a lot of interesting ways. But he had been through the ringer enough that I think he saw me and was willing to take me on as a project. He was the kind of guy is the kind of guy who has little aphorisms that I find myself now saying to my team all the time. My view of the world is that I'm going to give you wide open fields, but high fences, right? You're always going to know where the fences are. But he was really good at building a team. He could, he got this team of guys together and women together to build the direct-to-consumer and e-commerce business at Logitech. And he had a charter and a mission, and he understood how to invest in people. My one-on-ones with him, I could talk to him about anything, and I could challenge him on anything. And, having come from that engineering world, I always wanted to get on a whiteboard and argue with him and go no. And I'll never forget one time he said, I don't really respect when people get up on the whiteboard. If you haven't thought through the idea before you've come to talk to me, you need to go back and think it through. I still like to talk on a whiteboard because I speak to think is the way I like to describe it. But I really respected the notion that he's challenging me to think things through before I come. The first thing I learned from him is he really would talk regularly about how we bring our values to work, and that if you're going to show up at work for 8 to 9 hours a day, it's a huge portion of your life. You should be doing things that make you happy and make you smarter and make you better. And work is still work. It doesn't mean we don't have bad days or good days or whatever, but in the whole, you should be looking at your work as a thing that contributes to your joy. You're yeah, it should be. Why does it suck? And a lot of times it sucks not because of the work itself, but because of our own view of it, or maybe the situation at a company. But he was really, really good at being transparent and sharing his values with us in a way that made me want to be that kind of leader, and to not just invest in my employees, but to truly coach them and to try and find new ways to get the best out of people. And because I think that was the thing that he was best at. When he retired and left Logitech, I took over his role. And, to this day, I have hired people from that team that worked with us and continue to kind of work with folks that I've worked with there, to now even at SteelSeries, my partner on the D2C side of the business is a guy who was on our team there as well. And we have a similar working style. And a lot of how we view the world was shaped by the way Lance built his teams, the way he was a by the numbers guy. He is a by the numbers guy. I can still call him Lance. I think that's one of the things when the startup I was at, Vicis, VICS, IS that you talked about, football helmet startup, when I was working on that, when it failed, I called Lance and was like, man, I don't know. What do I need to do? What's next? And, we went back and forth on a bunch of things because I was getting a little worried, how do I get to the next level? I'm always stuck at this kind of current level. What do I got to do? And asking him, should I go back to college? Should I do this? Should I do that? He's the kind of guy who doesn't mind you texting him and jumping on the phone and bumping ideas off of him. And I think the lesson I think I really learned from him was availability, right? He always had time. Even though I worked remote, I was up here in Seattle, he was down in California. He was always available to jump on and work a problem, to invest in the approach. But he was a pretty formulaic guy, and I liked that too. It worked for me. He had these formulas he used for everything. And it was during that time that he encouraged me to continue to go out and speaking. And so that's around the time we met. He wanted me to not give up this thing that I was doing at Microsoft and learning about that was good for my career. It's how he discovered me. Also knowing that thinking about other things would help me enjoy the work I was doing again. That thinking about other businesses besides the Logitech business, expanding my horizons and taking tough questions from people and investing in my own learning and then sharing my learnings with others was going to be good for Logitech and good for me. And I think you're lucky when you have a manager who sees you as a kind of player. I grew up playing hockey and I enjoy soccer. And I talk to my team. I hate that, I'm always trying to like avoid sports and military metaphors, but they're really hard to avoid in business. But like, I talk to my team a lot right now, my current team at SteelSeries, about the need for nobody on the team to be a single position player. Like, it's nice to have a vertical you're strong in, but that we need to be a team like Ajax we're going to play total football, and everybody has to help create space for other players on the team to get their job done and to score a goal or whatever it happens to be. And Lance was kind of the first person that got me thinking about how you structure a team, how you coach people, how you invest in individual players on the team creates a different set of results than if you just say, here's your goals, here's the team's mission, go do it, here's the OKRs. He was never a just go do it guy. He was always investing in the mental state of the players on his team. And I think that's a important thing for us as leaders and as mentors to remember, that it's about your mentals and your attitude. That's one of the best ways you can coach people, is through keeping their head right at any given moment and focused on the things that matter and not on the things that don't. And he was great at that. And I thank him regularly. I think he knows how I feel about him. He's such an interesting character, kind of retiring a little early, way earlier than me. I think his goal in life was retirement, where my goal in life is like, how can I work until the day I die? But I think that was also of huge value to me, was seeing somebody that I related to so much, but also had such different values than me. That desire to get home from work and be with his wife and his daughter, and how he brought those values into the workplace taught me a lot.
So when you left Logitech, it must have been hard, because it sounds like you're really close with him. Was there a certain sadness when you left?
I think this is a underrated thing in work, that like when you leave a job, whether you're going to someplace new that you're excited about, or if you're laid off, or if the company has to do layoffs, or the company goes out of business, which is like, they say that leaving any job is a bit like going through a divorce, that you go through this sort of grief, and there's that kind of FOMO that people experience that I think is hard, because your peers are still out there doing stuff and you kind of want to be with them. And I loved Logitech. I just hit the top of where I was going to be at Logitech. After he retired and set me up for success, I was already kind of on my own. I was building a new team. I set that team up for success. Logitech got a new CMO. And I remember meeting her and thinking, oh, I'm probably done here. It's like I was the guy hired by the last guy. And not that she didn't like me. She was amazing, by the way. Like, I instantly was like, oh, she's super smart. But she had a way of doing things that was like, she was going to want to take the things I'd been building and shape them in her image. And I was like, this is going to be I will be in her way. When I resigned, I sent the CEO, and he called me and was like, is there anything we can do to convince you to stay? Bracken Darrell, great CEO. He's currently at VF Corp, like Vans. Really amazing and interesting guy. Calls me up on the phone immediately and is like, what can we do to get you to stay? And I was like, look, you hire this new CMO and she's awesome, and I will be in the way. Like, I can already tell I'm going to be in the way. If the company is going that direction, you guys should have a chance for her to be a success. And I don't want to just be this burden of the legacy way things should work. Let's go amicably, and I'll just go and find a new playground. And I'd wanted to work in VR. I talked with both Facebook and HTC, and HTC was here in Seattle. And I'd had a former coworker who worked there and was like, I'm going to go play over here for a while. And if you guys ever want me back, I'm always willing to talk. But in the meantime, I think there was grief for a while. It was 8 really successful years for me of personal growth and development, being able to move on to several next new levels and take on more work. Things that running a sales and marketing team was something I never thought I would do as an engineer. I was like, learning all the numbers and the budgeting process and all of that stuff that Lance taught me, how to operate a business, not just how to work a business and to plan, but actually the fundamentals, the P&L and all of that. It was sad for a while. I definitely went through a period of like even jumping into my new job and the excitement of it but still being like, I wonder what this person's doing. I wonder what that person's doing. I wonder how the business is going, and sort of peeking in on things. It's hard not to. But I think when you bring on a new employee who comes from a place, even with that excitement, I think a great manager tries to understand the feelings they might be going through in the first couple of months that help them embrace the new team and get excited about being where they're at, because everybody has gone through something. If they've gone through layoffs, even more so, right? Because that's often devastating to people's financial life, and they're excited about the new job and they're excited to get back to work, but they're maybe operating at a level of fear. And you want to get them into a place of positive forward momentum, not just, like, nobody wants to be around a drowning man, right? Like, that's the most dangerous place to be, is to be around somebody who's drowning. And so I think if you're bringing in somebody new who's gone through a big transition, I think supporting somebody through that transition and getting them into the work is really important, so that they feel less like that having just gone through a divorce, and instead more like a new romance, something to be excited about.
So what's so weird? I know this isn't good podcast etiquette, but as you were talking, I remembered something that you said years ago. I remember in one of your talks, you spoke about getting, like, I think it was something like a 4 to 8 ROAS on Google Ads, selling Logitech. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
But to me in my mind, it was always like, shh, like all those years after, it was like, how do I get that 4 to 8 that Jeremiah spoke about? It's just so funny for me to remember that now. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, we our heavy focus. It was. I'll never forget Lance once. He had all these aphorisms. It was like, we've given you the company's checkbook. Like, failure isn't like having a campaign that goes sideways. That's going to happen. Failure is not trying. And he's like, but on the other hand, we've given you the company's checkbook, and you need to treat it like your own. And from a contribution margin standpoint, if we made $1 and it took us $1 to make that $1, we're not doing very good. But if we make $10 and we spent $1, now we're self-funding. We don't have to go and ask for budget. We're self-funding out of the margin of the products. So, like, how do you get on various products? And it was the first time I actually started thinking about my efforts in regard to work as a contribution to the total margin, and as a part of the finance, marketing as a part of the finance. And there are intangibles in marketing and branding that, to make those numbers work, you have, like, chasing the last click and chasing the ROAS is like heroin. You'll get it once and then you'll be doing it forever.
Look what you did to me, Jeremiah. What the heck, man?
I know. Seriously. And I've spent a lot of my career chasing these, like, very difficult numbers. And it's gotten a lot harder, because I think what was once possible between Facebook and Google is less possible than it used to be by design from them. They recognized people were making too much money and then would spend less on ads. And so they've made it harder for us. And, but I think at the same time, even then it was about facing the landscape of the business we were trying to create, looking at what was possible, and then striving for the best thing that was possible. And Lance was really good at pointing that out. I don't know if he actually thought we could hit 10 to 1 or 12 to 1. And at various times we'd hit some pretty crazy numbers. We had a good year where we were doing like 12 to 1 across all of our media. And I was crazy. Like, you guys need to give me huge raises. But I'm also acting like a day trader back then. I'm like,
totally.
You're not sleeping a whole lot if you're chasing a 12 to 1 return on ad spend. But in his mind also, it's like, well, Amazon and Best Buy and this company and that company, like, their margins don't work if they can't be profitable against their margins. And so, it was just this sense that you had to chase the best margin possible. And I think even now, one of the biggest things I end up talking to people a lot about in work when I'm coaching people is, like, what is the business model you're chasing? If you're buying media from my team and you're thinking about it at this super high brand level and not at that growth or incremental margin spend level based on the way the funding works for this particular set of campaigns, you're already doing it wrong. It's like, I need you to first think about what our business model is and then move over here. And oftentimes if you're an I-shaped individual and all you think about is media buying, you may not think about how like, oh, the funding for this media comes from a 23% or a even smaller margin cap. And it's not really a budget fund in OpEx, but from a P&L perspective, we can take this out of margin as long as we don't exceed it. Nobody's going to bother us, Otherwise, we have to, from a financial perspective, treat it as OpEx, and now we're in the negative. And like having somebody coach you through how the business actually works can be really eye-opening to the way you design your own performance. And it sets a different expectation for the employee. It says, I'm contributing not just to this media application, but to the output of the business. I actually am impacting the total revenue target for the year. I am impacting the regional revenue target, the whatever, right? The growth of this business is in my hands. And that growth is both at the financial contribution level, as well as the new users in the queue, And he was so good at coaching through stuff like that. I dream of those kinds of ROASs and sit and think about ways we could do that. And it's unfortunately gotten much harder. And I think a big part of our job these days is we coached all these people that this is the way the world works. And now we're having to retrain them because the world doesn't actually work that way anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that like all of our upper management, all these like people who grew up in running magazines and TV ads, we coached them on a whole new way the world could work. And now we're having to undo that is kind of a shitty thing to have to do.
Yeah, that's why I say digital marketing it's kind of like going up the hill and now we're going back down. It's like, yeah, it definitely is not easy. You mentioned a topic that I'm also passionate about because in my company, we actually have mostly females. So I just wanted to know why, you mentioned one of the things you wanted to talk about is about supporting female leadership. Obviously, women have certain challenges being leaders in an organization, but what's important to you about that? How do you help the women on your teams or even in just your colleagues deal with the challenges?
I started at Logitech at the time Lance left. There was a kind of attrition that was happening where people were starting to leave and turn over, and I had to do some hiring. And this was the first time I ever started thinking about this. Before, I never really thought about it. I was like, I've worked with women and I've worked with men, and it all seems great. But now I'm the boss, and I'm having to do hiring. And I was trying to hire in Europe. And I was shocked because I would talk to the recruiters at Logitech, and I would get the same resumes over and over and over again. And they were all men. And granted, I work in consumer electronics. So like there's kind of draw. But on paper, they all looked the same. And I was like, for the consumer electronics industry to grow, we actually need people with some different ideas. We need people from different industries. We need people. And but I couldn't figure out why I was only like in the globe. It doesn't make sense that I would only get male resumes. And it was just very strange to me. And it stood out as something that was weird. And so I'd start talking to the recruiter, and the recruiter's like, well, in this country, when people get the CV, you get the like picture of the person and their name, and you get all this history. And in Europe, people will even put like if they have children and stuff on their resume. And I was like, I don't want any of that. When you're doing the screeners, when you have a screener do recruiting, whether it be a tool or anything, I want CV to job description match, and that's it. And pull their names, pull everything off the top of the resume. I don't want the actual recruiter to see any of that. Let's get them just CV comparisons and overnight, all of a sudden, I had 49% of the resumes were now women and the rest were men.
Wow.
All of a sudden. And it was very eye-opening to me personally. And it became like, I'm like, something about this I don't like. I just don't like that. I don't like that feeling that there was a game being played on my behalf even, right? Like,
because it affects you.
100%. Now all of a sudden I have 3 really talented women on my team, both senior. All 3 of them were relatively senior, and I have to guide them the same way I'm being guided. And I remember reaching out to a couple of friends in the search industry, particularly women friends, and saying like, okay, now all of a sudden I've got a bunch of women on my team, and I'm the boss. What do I need to do to coach them? And the reality is on one hand, it's the same things you have to do with everybody else. It's listen to them, try and understand what their goals and ambitions are. But I also think, like, for me, the changeover was really putting them in a position where they could speak on behalf of the team, where they could invest and bring skills from, you don't often think about when you think about consumer electronics to the forefront. I have right now, my team is 50% women, 50% men, even split right down the middle at SteelSeries. Our CMO is a talented and strong woman who's been both in the CPG industry as well as consumer electronics. She worked with us briefly as a consultant at Logitech. I'm surrounded by strong female players. And I think the difference for me, though, is that in the industries I've worked in, there has been this expectation that women needed to work like we do. And I don't think a man needs to work the way I do. I want a man on my team to come in and bring his unique talents and strengths to the team. And it is my job as the manager to bring out those talents and help them execute to the best of their ability. Same thing with women. If you're going to invest in them, you got to invest in them at the level of what are their unique strengths and talents, and allow that to come to the forefront and allow that to, whatever those differences are. And sometimes, I mean, you'll work with women, especially in the sales side of things, that are as aggressive and as, for lack of a better word, bro-y as any other, particularly in the sales side of the world. It's just something that attracts sales women versus sales men. They just can be very aggressive. In the world we're in, I mean, marketing is so much, it's art and science. And so we need to draw that out, and we need to create a space where people can be free to be the version of themselves that they are. And that both means being a woman or being a man or being, gender fluid or whatever, right? Like, I want to bring out the best. And it starts with having a heart of seeing people for the talents and interests that they have, and encouraging them to apply that to the business they're in. When I left Logitech and HTC, there was this part of me that's like, I want any other job than working in consumer electronics. It's like, I don't want to be known as the consumer electronics guy. I would sell diapers, but only because I was hungry to learn new things. And I think one of the beauties of bringing in women and investing in women on the team is they bring with them a whole host of differences in when we watch female game players play versus male game players. There's a different way in which people play. There's a different way in which people who are left-handed versus right-hand play. And I want the world of gaming, since I do work in consumer gaming, I want gamers to play their best and to be the hero of their own story when they're playing. I know that sounds very marketing, but I want them to be the hero of their game. And I think women bring their own unique sort of vibe to a team. But if you're going to have women on the team, there are cultural things that I have a global team. My team's from all over the world. So we're not even just dealing with stereotypes of women in business from the US, but my right-hand person right now is a Chinese woman who lives in France and is very French and very Chinese all at the same time. And culturally, there's a lot of differences there than me, a white guy from the Midwest. And I have to make space for her to talk, to explain things to me, to help me understand her viewpoints. And if you're going to lead a diverse team, you have to be willing to sit with people and respectfully challenge them and encourage them and ask them to be their best, but also listen to them, to hear them and to see them, and to make space for them to lead and to lead in their own way, because it's going to be different than how you lead, inevitably. In a lot of ways, it's helped me. I hired a executive coach a few years ago just to try and get better. And it was a successful executive. And I've learned a lot from her. She challenges me a lot in my own goal setting and approach. And I think in having a woman executive coach, it's made me a better mentor and coach to my own team of women. And I think I do. There are times when I have difficult conversations because you have to sort of say like, well, this guy is kind of old school and you have to do things this way to get this thing done. I hate telling people that because they shouldn't have to. But on the other hand, we're all people and we have to live in a world where things don't always work the way we want them to. I'll admit I was a little worried as I've sort of elevated this woman in France. Like, would people in her office respect her the way they would a male colleague being the lead? Would the men there, like the culture there is interesting at times with regard to men and women. And yet what you find out is that it's not about, those are not things about her capabilities, and we should be focused on her capabilities. And that's how you invest in women in leadership is you invest in her capabilities, not the culture's needs. You add to those capabilities so that she can adapt to whatever the culture is. The expectation then is that we're growing and making a place that women can be promoted, that they can grow, that they're representative of our user base, and that their ambition can be achieved the same way a man's can. And I definitely have had conversations. At a previous company, I had a young woman who worked for me where 4 months in our one-on-one, I would say, we have this upcoming annual review, and you really need to ask me for a raise. You really need to say this. And I was telling her, because it's not that I didn't want to give that to her, it's that the company culture was such that if she didn't ask, I was sort of morally obliged not to. Right. I think people don't always understand that you have a fiduciary responsibility that sometimes means it's unfair. But on the other hand, like, you have to be a different person in the negotiating room than you are on the work floor. Mm-hmm. And every annual review is a chance to have this negotiation with your manager. And I would sit there and kind of like hint at her, like, if you don't do this, I'm sort of like, my hands are tied. But if you do this, and it was weird to be like, as a friend, you should ask me this, because I'm, at the end of the day, I need you to push for what you want and need. Otherwise, the company will not allow me to give it to you. And I think those are tricky conversations you have to coach people on, and it's unfair that the world is structured to the way men think and work a lot of times. As a mentor and as a manager, we have to do our best to see those opportunities and step ahead of them. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a big thing for me personally. I hope that all makes sense.
No, it does. And that's such an awesome perspective. I really appreciate it. So now it's time for our lightning round. I'm going to mention 5 categories, and you can either tell me your favorite part of it or your favorite type. Move through it pretty quickly. So first one is rifles and hunting.
So funny thing about rifles and hunting, I grew up hunting and shooting. But really, it's been later in my life that I started learning how to coach and teach people how to shoot and train people. There was a lot of interest around, obviously, during COVID, people wanting to learn. And I am a safety nut, and I'm not a gun nut. I'm a safety nut. And so I spent a lot of time wanting to learn more. And so rifles became super interesting to me, partly as a competitive person, too, because I wanted to go out and shoot competitively. I wanted to test myself. And then you get into the science of ballistics, and I'm a real engineering nerd. And so how can I shoot further? How can I shoot, it's not about volume, but how can I be more accurate, and learning about accuracy versus precision. So rifles and hunting for me became this way to apply all this fun, weird stuff that I was doing in my business life into this weird hobby that I understand comes with a bunch of, strange implications, but it's also become now a place of joy for me to go out every year with my family and go hunting again, to bring home a freezer full of meat and know where it came from, and to learn how to learn so much about the animals that we hunt. I love these animals. I know it seems counterintuitive, but I spend my year watching them on cameras and learning their behaviors, and you get to a point where you're actually less interested in killing them, and you just get super excited to go out there. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt or somebody else that said, we don't hunt for the kill, but we hunt for the hunt itself is the thing, right? I know I'm misquoting this entirely, but there's a bit, once you actually get into it, there's this thing where you start to realize so much of the gun and hunting thing is about being with minded people who want to challenge their own abilities. And I love being challenged, whether that's in sport or in hunting or in shooting. And that's why I am just not allowed to have any more hobbies that are challenge things, because I would never get any work done.
All right. How about dogs?
Dogs. I have 3 dogs, Rosie, Ruby, and Freya. They keep me very busy. They're sitting around me right now, fortunately sleeping, but I always grew up with dogs. I've had them with me forever. They travel with me at times, which is wild. Every summer I try to go on road trips to see family and friends, and I just throw them in the back of the Defender and away we go. And they are my constant companions. So I love them to death.
Photography.
I started collecting vintage cameras when I was 18 years old. I just loved the engineering. I loved how they sounded like watches, and they were clicky and amazing and interesting. I dreamed of one day owning a Leica. I now have 15 Leicas, and I have a Hasselblad, and I have shot all over the world. And I currently have a photo hanging in the Leica Wetzlar, Germany, in their headquarters at their corporate museum. I won an award a few years back. I shoot for my own pleasure and enjoyment. A lot of people shoot and they enter their photos into competitions. That's just not me. But every once in a while, I'll get outreach and things from people who like my photography or are interested. And that's always nice when somebody enjoys your stuff. But I do it for me. My house is full of art and photography. So
growing up, my dad had a shelf on the way to his bedroom, which had like a bunch of vintage cameras. So that's definitely a part of my life. But I don't know all the names. But I could definitely appreciate it as well. How about travel?
Travel's one of my favorite things. I'm probably my most happiest when I'm experiencing a new culture or somewhere else. I've been to every continent other than Antarctica. I'm still terrified of flying a little bit. I don't think people realize like you can be terrified of flying and like it, but I love being on the road. I like driving adventures as much as I like flying adventures, but I just like being in other places and experiencing new things. I used to be such a picky eater as a kid, and I've just learned to like be in the culture and be in the moment. I don't like doing touristy stuff. I want to go to the like local bar or the local restaurant. And I like challenging myself, but my favorite place probably ever is still probably Tokyo. It's just such a foreign concept. Mexico City is an amazing city and it's one of my favorites, but I would go to Tokyo over just about any place in the world if I could go again right now, just because there's so few people who speak English. There's so few, like, it's such a dynamic place. For someone with ADHD, it can be overwhelmingly loud at night, like just anxiety creating with all the blinking lights and noise. But then in the morning, it's so quiet, you can hear the clicking of women's heels on the sidewalk. It's crazy and it's beautiful. I highly encourage travel. And if you have one thing you should add to your life's pursuits to make yourself a better person, it's travel. You'll just become a better person. You'll appreciate what you have more, and you'll want more for yourself too. I think you'll want a better culture and a better world.
And then finally, your most favorite tech right now?
I actually think where things are going with cars is really interesting. Even in ICE vehicles, there's just an amazing amount of tech going into cars right now. The sensors, it's hard to begin to even understand how much our cars have become computers in the last, maybe even just the last 10 years. And when you look at the innovations that Tesla has made, the work that BMW and Mercedes are doing, I follow a bunch of people from Mercedes and their innovation labs. And it's just like the stuff they're thinking about in trying to make the world better around cars is crazy. And yet the biggest problem we have is that the tires still produce most of the microplastics and waste. And we haven't solved that yet. Like,
they're kind of ignoring that for now.
Yeah. Well, I think that the electric stuff doesn't make it any better. In fact, it makes it worse, but I think that's what makes it interesting, right?
Jeremiah, this has been such an awesome conversation. I definitely have so much more to discover about you and just your perspective, but thank you so much for being a guest today. And thank you everyone else for joining the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.